On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the American naval base at Pearl Harbor was a picture of peace. It was a warm, quiet Sunday in Hawaii, and much of the Pacific Fleet lay sleeping at anchor. 2 hours later, that peace was gone forever. Battleships were burning and capsizing, more than 2,000 Americans were dead, and the United States had been dragged into the Second World War. In a single surprise attack, Japan changed the course of history, and in doing so, it may have sealed its own doom. This is Pearl Harbor. For most Americans, this was the moment the Second World War truly began, the day the distant fighting reached across the ocean and struck them at home. It would end America's uneasy peace and pull it, all at once, into the greatest war the world has ever known. To understand how it happened, you have to go back to a slow collision between a rising empire and a reluctant giant. By 1941, Japan was an empire on the march, conquering across Asia and the Pacific in a hunt for oil, rubber, and land. But its expansion had brought it into a deepening clash with the United States, which had cut off Japan's vital oil supply to try to force it to halt. For Japan's leaders, that embargo felt like a slow strangulation. They resolved to seize the oil and resources of Southeast Asia by force and take their chances in a war with America. It was a staggering risk. America's economy was many times the size of Japan's, but its leaders convinced themselves that one hard blow could shatter America's will to fight. But one thing stood in their path: the powerful United States Pacific Fleet, based at Pearl Harbor, which could smash any Japanese move across the ocean. So Japan's brilliant Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto devised a daring and desperate plan: cripple that fleet in one lightning blow before war was even declared, and buy Japan time to build an unbreakable empire. Yamamoto had studied in the United States. He knew its factories and its wealth, and he dreaded a long war. But if war was coming anyway, he wanted to land the first, crushing blow himself. It was an enormous gamble. A fleet of 6 aircraft carriers would sail thousands of miles across the empty northern Pacific in total secrecy and launch a surprise air attack on Hawaii. For 11 days they steamed toward Hawaii under complete radio silence, hidden by fog and storm, and were never spotted. And on the morning of December 7th, from a point north of the islands, they launched their strike. 353 aircraft in 2 great waves thundered off the carrier decks and turned toward Pearl Harbor. Below them, in the pre-dawn dark, the crews of the fleet cheered them off, certain they were about to deal the blow that would win Japan the war. As the planes climbed into the dawn, their commander radioed a single coded signal back to the fleet to confirm that complete surprise had been achieved. Tora, Tora, Tora. The Americans had no idea they were coming. It was a lazy Sunday morning. Sailors slept in or lined up for breakfast or made ready to raise the colors. There had been warnings and clues, but they were scattered, ignored, or misread. War was expected somewhere far away, not here, not now, and surely not at Pearl Harbor. An Army radar station actually detected the incoming planes and reported them. But an officer, told a flight of American bombers was due that morning, waved the warning away and told them not to worry about it. And so, just before 8 in the morning, the first Japanese planes swept in low over the water, and the war came to America. For a few seconds, some of the men on deck thought it was a drill or a stray American plane gone astray. Then the bombs began to fall, and the illusion shattered. The torpedo bombers came in first, skimming the surface to drop their torpedoes into the battleships moored in a neat row along the shore. The great warships, caught completely by surprise, had no room and no time to escape. One after another, they were hit by torpedoes and bombs and began to burn and settle into the harbor. The cruelest blow of all fell on the battleship Arizona. A bomb plunged down and set off her forward magazine, and the entire ship erupted in one colossal explosion. Arizona was torn open and sank within minutes, taking 1,177 of her crew down with her. Most of them lie entombed inside the wreck to this day. Close by, the battleship Oklahoma rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of men inside her upturned hull, some of whom would survive in the dark for days before rescuers could cut them free. Rescuers heard them tapping on the hull from inside for days and cut down through the steel to reach them, saving 32 men in a desperate, round-the-clock effort. All along Battleship Row, ships were listing, exploding, and going down. Men leapt into water that was itself on fire with burning oil and swam for their lives. Meanwhile, Japanese planes smashed the American airfields, destroying most of the aircraft on the ground before they could ever get into the fight. But even in the chaos, Americans began to fight back. sailors raced to their battle stations through smoke and flame and strafing fire. Cooks and clerks manned anti-aircraft guns they had barely trained on. Men fired rifles and pistols at the diving planes, and a few American fighters even clawed their way into the air to shoot some down. The doctor and the chaplain, the mess cook and the ship's bandsman, all of them found themselves suddenly at war, doing whatever they could in the smoke and the deafening noise. But it was far too little and far too late. In under 2 hours, the two waves of Japanese planes had done their terrible work and turned the mighty Pacific Fleet into a graveyard of burning, sinking ships. In the middle of it, small boats braved the flames and the machine guns to pull burned and drowning men from the water, one at a time. By the time the attackers turned for home, the harbor was a hell of blazing oil, capsized hulls, and shattered steel. 21 American warships had been sunk or badly damaged, nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed, and 2,400 Americans were dead, with over 1,000 more wounded. It was the worst single military disaster in American history, and it had come out of a clear blue sky, without warning, in a matter of minutes. And yet, hidden inside that catastrophe were the seeds of Japan's own defeat. The most important targets of all, the American aircraft carriers, were not in the harbor. By sheer luck, all three were out at sea and came through completely untouched. It was those carriers, not the battleships, that would go on to win the war in the Pacific, and Japan had missed every single one of them. Yamamoto's own airmen had wanted a third strike to hit the fuel in the repair yards and finish the job, but the admiral in command, uneasy about those missing carriers, chose instead to turn for home. The Japanese also failed to hit the base's huge fuel oil tanks, its dry docks, and its repair yards, leaving Pearl Harbor able to rebuild and fight on within months. Most of the sunken battleships lay in shallow water. In time, all but two would be raised, repaired, and sent straight back into the war. Ship by ship, the very fleet Japan had tried to destroy in a single morning rose again from the mud of Pearl Harbor to fight another day. But the greatest miscalculation of all was not about ships at all. It was about the American people. The very next day, President Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and called December 7th a date which will live in infamy, and asked for a declaration of war. The nation that had been bitterly divided about entering the war was, in a single morning, united in absolute fury. Millions of young men rushed to enlist. Yamamoto himself is said to have feared exactly this, that all Japan had truly done was to wake a sleeping giant and fill it with a terrible resolve. Remember, Pearl Harbor became a battle cry that would echo across 4 years of war, all the way to the skies over Tokyo itself. In the years that followed, American shipyards would launch new carriers faster than Japan could ever sink them, until the ocean itself belonged to the United States. The vast industrial might of America now turned entirely toward war, and it would not stop until Japan lay in ruins. Japan had won a stunning tactical victory at Pearl Harbor, but it had made a mortal enemy of the most powerful industrial nation on Earth, and there could be only one ending. For a few months, Japan would seem unstoppable, but the clock had started ticking on its empire from the very moment the first bomb fell. The men who died on that quiet Sunday morning were the first of many, but their loss pulled America into the war and set it on the long road that would end in victory. Next time we go back a year to a beach in France and an army with its back to the sea, and a miracle of deliverance snatched from the jaws of total defeat, Dunkirk.